Hello everyone, this is Aaron from Hybrid with my review of Garcia, a show adapted from a Spanish graphic novel of the same name. And just to start out, we need more of this kind of show. A show that knows what it is and sticks with it. Garcia is a show that happens when the pendulum starts to swing back from the woke. So we're short on time, so let's get right to it. The setup for Garcia is going to be a familiar one for us. He's a Spanish Cold War era super soldier who was put on ice in the 60s and wakes up in modern day Spain, kind of like our Captain America, which is fine because Cap has been completely destroyed by the woke in comics and in live action, as well as pretty much all of our modern mythological heroes. So we're going to need some new ones. And what stands out to me are the flashback scenes. I really like those. The black and white ones with the 4:3 ratio with the really dramatic music. Definitely this pulpy retro vibe. So from here on out, spoilers, big time spoilers, you're being warned. So here we go. Okay, so in these flashback scenes, we learn Garcia is a super soldier working for a government spy agency called Section 9. That's right, Section 9. If you don't know why I sound so incredulous right now, then clearly you haven't seen a red ghost in the shell. You couldn't use just a different number or a letter, Anyway, Garcia was created by a German scientist named Neffenberg. But Neffenberg also created another super soldier named Winters. Now, Winters is this scary Aryan type, or Scarian, if you will, capable of challenging Garcia 1-to-1. Now, Garcia at Section 9 has his sidekick/protege named Ortiz. Now, Ortiz idolizes Garcia. But then Garcia tells Ortiz one day that he's getting out of the spy game to marry his girl Felicity. Ortiz gets butthurt about Garcia putting hoes before bros and enlists Neffenberg to double-cross Garcia and capture him to prevent him from leaving. But Ortiz double-crosses Neffenberg as well and captures them both while the Scarian gets away. So now we're in modern times. A presidential candidate for Spain has been kidnapped. Now Ortiz is still kicking. He's in his 70s now, and he has an only daughter named Antonia, who's an intern at a newspaper of all media, because she's a pathetic shadow of a Lois Lane analog, and I'll get to why that is after the review. But one day she gets a mysterious package that leads her to Garcia's cryopod, and she wakes him up. Now Garcia bumbles around, typical fish out of water tropes, getting acclimated to this new time. But then Garcia reunites with Ortiz to solve the kidnapping. Now the Scarian returns and he gets wind that Garcia is back. And he comes after him because he wants to know what happened to Neffenberg. He sees him as his father figure. But of course Garcia doesn't know the events of how he was put on ice, so we can't help him. So now Garcia seeks out his old fiancée Felicity to see if she had a happy life because he feels like he abandoned her, even though it was out of his control. But when he's at her place, some Max Tac type shows up and go full shoot first, ask questions later mode. Like, how did they find him? Who knew where Garcia was going to be? Well, it turns out that Ortiz engineered everything. Garcia waking up, the kidnapping and subsequent murder of the candidate to generate some political unrest so that the current outgoing president will have to return to office, reinstate Section 9 under the guise of security, and then Ortiz can effectively influence the presidency from the shadows. So as all this is taking place, the Scarian ends up kidnapping Antonia, and this forces Ortiz to give up Neffenberg's location. So after some comic book medical logic, Garcia goes after her. Not nearly in time to stop the Scarian from reviving Neffenberg, but Antonia manages to escape herself, and the Scarian and Neffenberg get to a helicopter to escape. Now there's a bunch of soldiers with automatic weapons between Garcia and Neffenberg, and all I could think in this scene was, wow, I think a shield would be really helpful right about now. But Garcia gets through using comic book logic, but not before the Scarian flies off with Neffenberg. Okay, so now they're scot-free. They're in the wind. They are gone. But Neffenberg turns to the Scarian and is like, aren't you going to fight Garcia? And the Scarian's like, no. So then he's like, oh, you're such a disappointment. So then he turns around, inexplicably turns around, lands the helicopter, gets out, and fights Garcia. Like, are you kidding me? Like, talk about the bad dad trope taken to an extreme. Like, Scarian got what he was after and got away, but now he's fighting to the death for the approval of his father figure, and he does die in a fight with some over-the-top religious imagery. Then Antonia shows up during the fight and helps Garcia. And after it's over, Ortiz shows up. And that's when Antonia goes full Pan's Labyrinth on her father. You'll never know your grandchildren's name. They'll never know who you were. Every real man knows that that's punishment worse than death. And Ortiz earned it. But Garcia survives. And he learns that Neffenberg actually created 3 super soldiers. So there's still one out there that he has to go find. And that's where the show ends. And overall, I'm giving Garcia a B. I enjoyed it. It was an entertaining watch, and I hope they make a season 2. It had an easy-to-follow story that didn't try to be complicated for the sake of being complicated. Even though there was a lot of comic book logic and some suspension of disbelief, it was fun. I mean, Garcia's Batmobile was an old Seat. Come on. And it wasn't obsessed with pushing a political message, even though it did land some hard hits on the extreme left, which I'm going to talk about right now. Now, there may be more nuanced criticisms that I missed because I'm not thoroughly engrossed in Spanish day-to-day life. But these are the ones that I noticed. Now, the first ones I'll talk about were in episode 4, and it was that noodle scene where Antonia and her newspaper friends were discussing what to do next. And this scene was implicitly uncouth, crude. Everyone in the scene was just consuming, almost grotesquely, these noodles that were in what we all easily identify as Chinese takeout containers. So here's this scene with these 20-somethings sitting in this impromptu forum, like ravenously and grotesquely consuming this Chinese product. Hey, you get it? You get the imagery? Now, in the same episode, a little later, Antonia catches up with Garcia and she tries to hide him from the cops because the heat is on him. And so she hides him in a wedding reception for 2 dudes she knows that just got married. Now, remember, Garcia is a guy straight out of the 50s. So in this situation, Garcia looks visibly confused and a little taken aback, understandably. But that's when Antonia says a line that I thought at the time was incredibly out of character, until I rewatched the series and realized it was completely in character. And I'll run that clip right now. So listen to this, or just read if you don't know Spanish.
Que en tu época todo esto sería muy distinto, pero aquí te metes la mierda homófoba donde te quepa.
Garcia is literally from another time, encountering this situation for the first time. Yet Antonia goes straight to the hateful rhetoric. And he probably doesn't even know what that word means, but she goes right to it, and she does it so nonchalantly. Like accusing people of terrible shit is funny and commonplace in her world. This sounds familiar, am I right? And her dickishness is amplified after the trans musical number when Garcia says to her that no matter what these people believe, they're Spaniards and they're his people and he's going to protect them. It's a very noble sentiment, almost heroic, one would say. But that is once again undercut by Antonia's viewpoint, the stand-in for the socialist youth, when she says that these people would disagree with him, that they're Spaniards. When I first heard that, I didn't quite know what that meant, but it felt important, even though it was said offhand. I was thinking there might be some history here that I'm not familiar with, so I went looking. And as best as I can tell, these kids are associating themselves more as being of their province than their country. And to us in the U.S., that sounds kind of ridiculous, but over there, it's a divide. It's like seeing somebody in a cowboy hat and saying, oh, you're from the United States? And then that person just getting angry and saying, no, I'm not from the United States, I'm from Oklahoma. And you're just like, what? It's like they're ashamed of their national history, so they're dividing themselves, hoping that'll erase history or something like that.
Don't say weird shit!
So now let's jump to episode 6. After the story concludes and we're now in the epilogue, there's a scene at the newspaper where Antonia goes to turn in her story, the story of everything that's happened over the 6 episodes. But her editor tells her that they're going to bury it because it doesn't suit the narrative that they're pushing. And in turn, they offer her a full-time employment contract, which is what she wanted, and she considers it. And the show ends, and she hasn't given an answer. It kind of says that she's okay with the cover-up, that she's okay with suppressing the story, suppressing facts. Now, that's very damning in terms of journalistic integrity. And that's why I said before that this is a pathetic analog of Lois Lane. Because when I was first watching that scene, I thought this was going to be Antonia's Lois Lane moment. She was going to take that intrepid journalist mantle for a new generation and tell her editor to shove that contract up his ass, that the truth matters and that the story's going to get out one way or another. But instead, we got her going along with it and contemplating accepting this deal. Now, in a scene following that one, Antonia says a line that is probably the most harsh criticism of the socialist left in this series. And it's very subtle because it's just one short line, but it speaks to such a deafening volume. But it's when she says, "The only decent man I know is a goddamned fascist." So how can this man be both decent and a fascist that is damned by God? So either God has made a mistake or Antonia doesn't know the meaning of the word she's using. Now, when she also has a boyfriend, but apparently she doesn't consider him decent, because of course she's referring to Garcia. And what that line is saying is, okay, we've been on this journey with her for 6 episodes. We know what she's experienced, and we know that Garcia is a heroic character, but she still drops this line. And it's not as a joke, but it's as a critique of her situation. And what the writer is saying here is that even a visceral lived experience that directly contradicts their social programming still will not break their indoctrination. This is an extreme criticism of the left hidden in one short line of dialogue.
There you go again, saying the weirdest shit.
Now let's go to the last one I saw at the very end of the series. Now this last slam on the socialist left is a dichotomy of scenes that have to be taken together. It's a commentary on language and words and what they tell us about the people that use them. So the first scene is Garcia visiting the grave of his girl Felicity, and her daughter's there. Now what's important about this is that we know nothing about the daughter, just that she's Felicity's kid, and she knows all about Garcia, who he is, where he's from, what his relationship with his mother was. So he's looking at her, and because she looks just like Felicity, because it's the same actress. But then she blurts out, "Oh, sorry, I don't date fascists." To which Garcia responds, "What's a fascist?" He doesn't even know what that word means, yet he was being referred to that the entire show. It's like they're trying to install a prejudice in him that didn't exist before. But now let's get to the second scene of this dichotomy. Like I said before, there was a third super soldier that Neffenberg created. And we see her in this cage fight at the very end. She kicks this dude through the cage, so she's obviously super powered. But then she yells at the guy and calls him, let's say, a slur. A slur that's also a word for a bundle of sticks tied together. You know what I mean? Now, just using that kind of language in that way tells us a lot about the character. That she's probably hateful, ignorant, small-minded, intolerant. It's not someone we really want to know or we really want to root for. Now let's get back to Felicity's daughter, who we also don't know, and what she said. She called Garcia a fascist. Now, using that language also tells us a lot about her, that she's probably hateful, ignorant, small-minded, intolerant, not someone we want to know or root for. And it was probably why it was so easy for us to believe Garcia walking away from the only remaining vestige of the love of his life, her only daughter. Well, thanks for watching to the end, and I will see you out there.